Hello, everyone. My name is Jillian Chapman. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Lake Bluff Public Library. I'm here today with Marion Dane Bauer. She is an award-winning author of middle grade novels, chapter books, picture books, and nonfiction works. She's a prolific writer who has written over 100 books over the course of her career. Today, we're here to talk about Winter Dance, written by Marion Dane Bauer and illustrated by Richard Jones. We're featuring this book in our winter story walk, which takes place throughout the month of December. It's on display in downtown Lake Bluff. You start at the Lake Forest Lake Bluff Community Church. We've got a sign there out front that says thank you to all the participating organizations and businesses. And then you move on to Bluffington's going west down Scranton, and then you take a left on Center and you curve around Innovazi going down the street there towards Twigs. So you just take a walk with our little foxy friend and get to know a little bit about the characters and the little creatures that they meet along the way. Thank you so much, Marion, for joining us today. We're really excited to have you.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Of course.
I think your story walk is a great idea.
It's wonderful to be able to share a book and story with a community in this way. We started it in 2020. The winter of 2020 specifically, and being able to bring literature out into the world really made a huge difference for the community when everything was in such a shutdown. So we've been really grateful and appreciative to continue this program with the sponsorship of the Friends of Lake Bluff Library. So I wanted to ask you a few questions. What makes Winter Dance different than some of your other books?
Well, I have to think about that a little. The main thing I can think of is that usually whatever my book is, whether it's a board book for babies or a young adult novel, there are children in the story, but there are people in the story. In this case, it's totally limited to animals. And I can think of a couple of my other books that are, well, this is a novel called Runt that's about wolf pups, and another, The Longest Night, that's about winter solstice, and that's totally involved with animals. No humans come into it. But I think that's about the only thing I can pull out that makes it somewhat distinct from my other books.
I remember reading Runt when I was a kid, and because I went back through some of your other books and just kind of like, I had known your name as an author, but I went back through and I love stories about wolves growing up. So I remember that book specifically, and just being able to follow that wolf pup was pretty, I don't know, iconic for me because it was an animal character that I, in general, kind of gravitated to as a kid. How long have you been writing?
I have been writing, well, on one level, I've been writing all my life, but I've been writing seriously, professionally, with the object of publishing for over 50 years. My first novel was published in 1976, so a long time ago.
That's amazing opportunity for you to have a long and lasting career. I mean, you have a few books that came out last year, right? In 2021.
Yes. And I have more in the pipeline that are coming out in the years following, whenever the illustrators finish their work on them.
I'm sure we can't wait to get a little bit more into that. Have you always been interested in storytelling?
I have, and from the time I began writing for publication, I knew I was writing for children, and the process of moving into that is a little bit mysterious to me. It was just there. It was a question I didn't ask. And the one moment I can remember is when I was in college. I took, I think, 2, maybe 3 creative writing courses when I was in college. And at one time, when I was supposed to be doing something important, something proper, which means something written for adults, of course, I sat down and wrote a paragraph that has long disappeared, but I still remember it with some clarity. And it was just a few lines about being a child, about 3 years old, standing on the hot, sunny sidewalk in my backyard barefoot and stepping off into the soft tickle of the grass. And it was just that entering that child moment that felt so profound to me. And so that the piece of paper I wrote it on is long gone, but the fact of writing it has never gone away. And some years later, when I began to write, hoping for publication, I just never asked the question. I just began writing for children.
Yeah, that makes sense, that memory or that experience stayed with you too. I mean, that's the power of storytelling and making those connections to what we take in through literature, which is just pretty wonderful.
Yes, it came out of that place in me that needed to write. And
Yeah.
that's the place I returned to when I began doing it more seriously, more steadily.
That's wonderful. What inspired you to go into children's books?
Well, that's really kind of the same thing. This is, let me tell you a little bit about my process on that. When I began, I didn't begin writing as my work until my youngest child began first grade. And I had that patch of time at home to do my own things. We were living in Hannibal, Missouri at the time. And Hannibal, Missouri, of course, is the home of Mark Twain. But we had Mark Twain Fried Chicken and we had Mark Twain Roofing Company. But if there was another writer in Hannibal, I never met that person. So I was working in complete isolation. The only place I could find to go that felt supportive was the public library. And so I began going to the public library. I started out writing picture books because I made the very false assumption that because they're short, they're easy. And I didn't understand how technical they were. And my own children were young. I had been reading picture books to them until they were flowing out my ears. And so I went to the library day after day, coming home with armloads of picture books. And eventually I began to get a little bored with the picture books. And so I moved up the stacks to older novels. I didn't know the older work for children. I had grown up with my mother's childhood books. I'd grown up in a small town that had a very inadequate library. Our school had no library at all. And so the books I knew were the ones in my home that were from my mother's childhood. And they were Louisa May Alcott. They were the Little Colonel series and the Little Prudy series, which no one has ever heard of now. And I did not know the contemporary novels for kids. I came across a shelf that said Newbery Award books. I didn't even know what the Newbery Award was, but I thought, well, somebody likes these books. And so I began taking from that shelf. And that's where I really fell in love with those novels. I fell in love at first with Paula Fox's Slave Dancer and with William Armstrong's Sounder. Those were the two books that touched me most deeply, that told me you can write about anything that can touch a child's life. And if you write it well, and with the child truly at the heart of it, you can publish it for children. And that's when I first turned to novels at that point.
That's lovely. And you have a Newbery Award as well from the 80s. What was that title?
I have a Newbery Honor Award for
Honor
my
Award.
book On My Honor, which was published in 1986.
That's very cool. How long have you been working with your illustrator, Richard Jones?
This is the only book he and I have done together. Generally what happens with the illustrations, and people often don't know this, I present a manuscript to the publisher without illustrations, I am not visual. I open a door. I know when I'm writing, I have to open a door for possibilities for illustration. They have to be there. but I don't even begin to think what they should look like because my imagination isn't a visual one. So I present the manuscript to the publisher. If the publisher decides to take it, then these days what they usually do is they do a study of who they think would be the best illustrators, and they send me a list, usually of 3 names. And these days also you can just go on the internet and see people's work. It's wonderful. I used to have to go to the library and delve through books trying to find some work from this writer. And then I let them know. I suppose it'd be possible that I would hate all 3 of them, but that's never happened. What I do is I let them know, this is my first choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice. And then they approach the writer to see if the writer wants, the illustrator, to see if the illustrator wants to do my book. And that's how that process works. And so these lovely illustrations by Richard Jones are the only ones I have had from him. And he did a beautiful job. And I know in reviews and comments, the illustrations are always pointed out for their softness and just for the way they carry the story forward.
I mean, they in themselves are stunning, but it is really the combination and marriage between the story and how it flows, and then the way that it moves on the page with the illustrations that really brings it all together. That's just really enchanting about this book, and probably why we gravitated to it for Story Walk, because you kind of have to go along with it, and it's a window each time. Essentially, I mean, literally it's in a window, but it's in a window of this space that you kind of go from one to the next, and having spreads is kind of crucial for Story Walk and getting people to want to continue down the street when they're reading.
It's truly a collaborative process. This is a wonderful text would be absolutely ruined by an illustrator who couldn't really move into that text and become part of it and extend it. A good illustrator carries the story beyond what the words on the page are.
Yeah, I'd have to say my favorite moment is the fox with the acorn and it falling on his head is pretty adorable moment throughout the book. What would you say to an aspiring writer?
I would say to an aspiring writer 2 things. First, read and read and read. Read everything you can lay your hands on. Read things that librarians and teachers tell you are good material to read. And then go off on your own and read things that you love that maybe librarians and teachers don't love in the same way you do. Find what fills you when you read. To be a writer, it lies on a foundation that we talk about stories an imitation of life. It's really an imitation of other stories. And you have to be full of other people's stories before you can begin to find the way to tell your own. The second piece of advice I would have is just write and write and write. Write, and when you love something, go back and see what you can do to make it even better than it was the first time. But just go on writing. You will mostly teach yourself. There will be people who will come along who can help you learn more than you're learning on your own. But a lot of what you learn as a writer, you'll learn just by the process of doing it and going back and reading, and then looking at your own work and going back and reading and just keeping doing it.
That's wonderful. And if you can tell us anything about your next project that you're working on.
I am, there are a couple in the pipeline that'll be coming out before anyone sees this, but the one that I'm waiting for editorial notes from an editor on is at the moment called, I'm not sure this title is going to hold, Our Home, Our Only Home. And it's about climate change. It's a picture book about climate change. And I have lately moved into more science-based books, and I have not been, I've never even studied science. In high school, I took the basic general science and biology, and that I was done with science from that point. As an old lady, I find myself fascinated with science, fascinated, pardon me, with physics, and looking at, studying all kinds of things. Takes a lot of work because I don't have the ground for that new information to fit into. But I did a lot of research about climate change, and my intent with it was to approach it to be totally honest about this very difficult subject, and yet to still be positive, to still be hopeful. And those two are not really easy to pull together, but I think I have done that with it.
That's wonderful. And I love that you have the ability to go from fiction and nonfiction and have such a wide range of topics that you like to talk to children about with your stories and your books and novels. Climate and change is such a huge key topic that we will forever need to continue to work on. And so every little bit helps, essentially. Which is pretty
I
great.
have found when you do any one thing for over 50 years, you have to keep stretching,
Yeah.
or you're going to just not only repeat yourself, you're going to bore yourself. And that's even worse, because if you bore yourself, you're for sure going to bore your readers.
Right.
And so that kind of stretching is what has kept me active and alive in this field.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for joining me today and sharing your story with the community and Lake Bluff. Again, Story Walk will be up for the month of December, and it will be on display in downtown Lake Bluff, starting from the community church, going all the way down around the corner to Twigs. But thank you again.
Thank you, Jillian. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks, Marion.
Okay.